Turn to the book of Ecclesiastes. In chapter 1 and also chapter 12. Chapter 1, we'll read verses 2 through verse 4. Vanity of vanities, saith the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What profit hath a man of all his labor which he taketh under the sun? One generation passeth away, and another generation cometh, but the earth abideth forever. Chapter 12, verse 13. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God, keep His commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. The book of Ecclesiastes is one of the more unique books of the Bible, and one for the most part is unread, studied very little. In the book, the phrase under the sun occurs 29 times. The phrase under heaven occurs 3 times, and the phrase upon the earth 7 times. So, from those 3 phrases, we see that the book is about life upon earth. Life upon earth. But it's not merely life upon earth, but Solomon is viewing it as life upon earth apart from God. Vanity of vanities, when life is lived apart from God. The book has its origin in Solomon's tragic sin of forsaking God and seeking satisfaction in the world apart from God. Ecclesiastes, therefore, is the inspired record of a life lived with God omitted. A life lived without God as the focus, without God as the purpose. The book contains the thoughts of Solomon, who was a man who at some point pursued life without God. And therefore, the tone of the book is very cynical, pessimistic. It lines up with his spiritual condition that he's looking upon. The book of Ecclesiastes basically is Solomon's survey and findings concerning the question, what is the meaning of life? What is life about? What is the purpose of life? And he finds concerning a life lived apart from God, verse 2, he says, vanity of vanities. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. He repeats those very same words in chapter 12 in verse 8. So he looks at his life apart from God and he says it's all a waste. It's all a waste. But by the time you get to the end of the book, Solomon has been brought to the knowledge of the meaning of life. What life is about. The purpose of life. He says, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. In other words, here is what I have found concerning what life is about. Here is what I have found concerning the purpose of life. Here is the bottom line. Here is the heart of the matter. Here is the main point. And what follows is God. He says, fear God, keep His commandments. And oh, that each person at some point in their life come to Ecclesiastes 12, verse 13. Concerning the meaning of life, what life is about, the purpose of life. It's God. It's God. Our subject this morning is living an unwasted life. Most people waste their lives. Most of God's people waste their lives. We're all guilty of having waste in our lives. And we're all guilty of wasting some portions of our life. But there are people who have wasted their whole life. Just a waste. We all have the gift of life. And life is a gift. Every single day is a gift. And none of us know how many more days we have. But don't waste it. However many more days that might be, don't waste it. A wasted life is a terrible thing. It's a terrible thing. Most spend their lives caught in trivial diversions concerning the real meaning. But God designed us for far more than being entangled in the trivial. So let's look at the discovery of Solomon about life apart from God. Solomon is speaking throughout Ecclesiastes as a life apart from God, seeking satisfaction in the temporal. He used the word vanity 33 times. The word vanities 4 times. That's 37 times. And the word means empty, without meaning, worthless. Life can be empty. Life can be without meaning and basically worthless. It is descriptive of a futile attempt to be satisfied apart from God, and the utter nothingness and sham of such a life. He also describes this life apart from God as vexation. 10 times he uses that word vexation. Notice in verse 14 of chapter 1, I have seen all the works that are done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and vexation of spirit. Vexation is a disturbance. It's to annoy, to agitate. How many people are just annoyed with life, agitated with life, troubled by life, tormented by life? Oh, there's many. Many. He also uses the word travail 8 times. Again, he's describing a life apart from God, meaning very hard, painful. Life apart from God is very hard, very painful. You have to wonder about people who are always saying, I'm talking about God's people, oh, life is so hard. Well, why is that? has a lot to do with the way you're living it. It shouldn't be that hard. So from all of this, we see that a life lived apart from God, and by that I mean simply God is not the main focus, is a life of emptiness. It's a life of emptiness. It's a life filled with disturbance. It's a life filled with agitation and turmoil. It is a life of disillusionment and disappointment, bitterness and chaos. Apart from God, Solomon found every aspect of life to be vanity and vexation and travail. Solomon found, apart from God, that wisdom, education, and learning are all vanity. Chapter 1, verse 13. And I gave my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom concerning all things that are done under heaven. This sore travail hath God given to the sons of men to be exercised therewith. Solomon also found that apart from God, that pleasure loses all of its meaning and is empty, bringing no real satisfaction. Hear him in chapter 2, verse 1. I said in mine heart, go to now, I will prove thee with myrrh. Therefore enjoy pleasure, and behold, this also is vanity. He's not saying that all pleasure is worthless. That's not what he's saying. He's saying, apart from God, it's all meaningless. It's all meaningless. In verse 10, and whatsoever mine eyes desired, I kept not from them. I withheld not my heart from any joy, for my heart rejoiced in all my labor, and this was my portion of all my labor. Chapter 7, verse 6. For as the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of the fool. This also is vanity. Solomon also found that apart from God, possessions and labor, being successful, and the power and the position and the prestiges of life are empty without God. Unsatisfying without God. Notice in chapter 2, he says in verse 4, I made me great works. I builded me houses. I planted vineyards. In verse 5, he mentions gardens and orchards and trees and fruits. He had pools of water in verse 6. He had servants and maidens, servants born in my house, and I had great possessions. In verse 8, he gathered silver and gold. He had singers, men singers and women singers. In verse 9, so I was great and increased more than all that were before me in Jerusalem. In verse 10, we've already read that verse. But verse 11, he says, then I looked on all the works that my hands had wrought, and on the labor that I had labored to do, and behold, all was vanity and vexation of the spirit. And there is no profit. There's nothing left over. That's what profit is. It's left over. Nothing left over. But this life, you can't bring it with you. So Solomon found that apart from God, all of these things are worthless. Verse 17 and 18. Therefore I hated life. A lot of people in that boat. Because the work that is wrought under the sun is grievous unto me. For all is vanity and vexation of the spirit. Yea, I hated all my labor, which I had taken under the sun, because I should leave it unto the man that shall be after me. What prophet is there? Hear him in chapter 5, verse 10. Last part of the verse says, labored for the wind. Labored for the wind. Hosea chapter 12, verse 1 speaks of those who feed upon the wind. There's nothing there. Labored for the wind. Feed upon the wind. That's pretty descriptive of a life apart from God. It's worthless. It's meaningless. So Solomon found that none of these things, wisdom, education, pleasure, wealth, labor, success, power, position, prestige, and pleasure, none of these were the key to life. He looked upon all these things again apart from God, and he says, all is vanity. All is vanity. But most have bought into the idea. We hear much about chasing the American dream. You know what that basically is? Ecclesiastes. These are not the keys to life. But most have bought into the idea that the key to happiness, the key to a good life, is one or all of these things, whatever it might be. But listen to Solomon. He says, all is vanity and vexation of the spirit. And again, he's describing a life apart from God. He's not just describing life in general. We need to understand that. But then notice how he describes this in chapter 5, verse 16. And this also is a sore evil, that in all points he came, so shall he go. And what profit hath he that hath labored for the wind? Chapter 6, verse 12. For who knoweth what is good for a man in this life, all the days of his vain life, which he spendeth as a shadow? Solomon is brought to know the meaning of life. And we want to consider that. We see this from our text in chapter 12. The question is often asked, what is the point of life? We often ask ourselves, well, what's the point? We get disappointed or discouraged. Well, what's the point? What's the use? What's life for? We all have it. What's it for? Why are we here? In order to live an unwasted life, you got to know what it's for. You got to know what life is for. And most people don't know what it's for. Most of God's people don't know what it's for. Well, it's for family. No, it isn't. No, it isn't. Well, it's for pleasure. No, it isn't. That's not what life is for. The conclusion that Solomon came to, he says, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. He's talking about life. He's saying when it comes to life, when it comes to living, this is the bottom line. This is the heart of the matter. This is the main thing. So here is a man who had given himself to every pursuit known to man. And he says, here's the point I came to. He had a wide variety of life experiences. And Solomon gathers the people, and he says, I'm going to tell you what it's all about. Oh, what's he going to say? What's he going to say? He says, here's the bottom line. Here's the heart of the matter. Man has a duty to God. He says that at the end of verse 13. He says, for this is the duty of man. So life is a responsibility. Life involves an obligation. Life is a responsibility and an obligation. This is the duty of man. And what came before that is man linked to God. Fear God, keep His commandments, for this is the duty of man. In every phase of life, in every pursuit of life, in every relationship, in every situation, in every circumstance in life, man has a duty to God. I don't care what it is, what aspect of life you're talking about, we have a duty to God. Everything about life is to be centered around God. And nothing in our duty to God is to become secondary. It's always to have priority. Always to have precedence. It's to be the foundation of everything we do. This duty. What is this duty? Well, he tells us. And this is the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God. Fear God. Have a respect for God. Have regard of God. To the degree that it causes you to be in awe and to be overflowing with affection toward Him. Also in this duty, keep His commandments. Fear God. Submit to God. This is the duty of man. This is the conclusion of the whole matter. Solomon is saying, I've tried everything. And this is the conclusion that I've come to about life. You see, life was designed for God to be the master and for us to be the subject. Every day that I have, I'm to be committed, I'm to be devoted to Him. Every day. Doesn't matter what else is going on. That's my duty. That's your duty. We're to live life in light of His ownership and His authority. In every phase, in every aspect, in every pursuit, in every relationship, in every situation, in every circumstance of life, reverence God. Submit to God. So Solomon is brought to see that God is the true meaning and purpose of life. It is God that gave us life, and He's to be the purpose of that life. He is the object of that life. He is the center. He is the highlight. He is to be the main feature of every single day. You won't waste your life if those things are true. But you will if they're not. He is to have the preeminence. He's to be the emphasis. He's to be the focal point. All of my todays are to be about Him. Doesn't matter what else is going on in the day. It's to be about Him. It's to be about Him. Every today that I have, I'm to live with regard to Him and for Him. He's the purpose of every day. Our lives are to be lived in relation to Him, lived in connection to Him, fellowship with Him, friendship with Him, agreement with Him, and in the enjoyment of God. Living every day, leaning upon Him, depending upon Him, relying upon Him, cleaving to Him, personally experiencing Him. He is to be everything. He's the purpose. He's the reason for every day. He is what every day is for. What is the purpose of today? God. What is the purpose of tomorrow? God. He's the purpose of every day. So personal examination is needed. How much of the Lord is in our day? The psalmist said in Psalm 16:5, "The Lord is my portion." That is, He's everything. There are not too many people that live life knowing that. He's my sufficiency. He's where I'm going to find satisfaction. Now, all of God's people would say, "Oh, yeah, I agree with that," but they don't live like it. He's my fulfillment. Well, if He's the fulfillment of life, why do we seek to be fulfilled in so many other things? Because we're not totally convinced that He's the fulfillment of life, that He's the contentment, that He's the happiness. He's enough. God is what I ought to want. That's what we ought to want. Oh, we want a lot of things. But how much do we want God? We need to live life wanting God. Psalm 16 verse 8 says, "I have set the Lord always before me." Life is to be lived seeing God, pursuing God. He's to be our vision. So God is the purpose of life. Now the purpose of life is also seen in the purpose of God in creation. It is declared in Psalm 19 verse 1 that the heavens declare the glory of God. God created the universe to display His glory. That's why He created it. That's His purpose. That is also the design and purpose of my life and your life. To manifest His glory. To manifest God. It's the purpose of our salvation in Romans 9:23, that He might make known the riches of His glory on the vessels of mercy which He had fore prepared unto glory. He saved us to make known the riches of His glory. In Romans 15:7 we read, "Christ received us to the glory of God." We were saved to the glory of God. That's the purpose of our salvation. Ephesians 1:6, "to the praise of the glory of His grace." So the purpose of God in salvation is the display of His glory. That's to be the purpose of my life. It's what we're here for. It's what we're here for. And all of my life is to be lived in that direction. Paul gave this exhortation, 1 Corinthians 10:31. "Whether you eat or drink or whatsoever you do, do all to the glory of God." That's the point of life. The glory of God. This is what we're here for. The glory of God. 1 Chronicles 16:24, declare His glory among the heathen. 1 Chronicles 16:28 and 29, give unto the Lord, ye kindreds of people, give unto the Lord glory and strength. Give unto the Lord the glory due unto His name. That's why we're here. That's why we're here. That's our purpose. Psalm 29:2, give unto the Lord glory and strength. Psalm 57:11, we have this prayer, be thou exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let thy glory be above all the earth. That should be our desire. The glory of God. That should be our desire for every day. The glory of God. Psalm 115 verse 1, not unto us, O Lord, not unto us, but unto thy name give glory. And on we could go throughout the Old Testament. We are here to glorify God. That is the point of life. The glory of God. That is what life is for. The glory of God. That is the main issue of life. The glory of God. That's to be our intention. That's to be our purpose in life. It's to be the direction in all that we do. Again, 1 Corinthians 10:31. Whether therefore ye eat or drink or whatsoever ye do. 2 words. Whether and whatsoever. Those 2 words cover everything. Covers everything. Do all to the glory of God. There are many issues. There are personal issues. There are relationship issues. There are career issues. There are church issues. What are we to do? Do all unto the glory of God. Whatever the issue, do all to the glory of God. Paul said in 1 Corinthians 6:20, glorify God in your body and your spirit. Glorify God outwardly, glorify God inwardly. All things and our entire being is to glorify God. We are to call attention to the greatness of God in everything. Why am I here? To call attention to God. Why are you here? To call attention to God. So regardless of what's going on, never remove it from this. Do all to the glory of God. That is to be our entire perspective of life. Now we know that we live in a world, and in this world we have worldly responsibilities. We have worldly concerns, and these are important. But they're not the main importance. And they're never the main importance. Never. People do it all the time. Well, God understands. God put you here to glorify Him. That's your purpose. That's your purpose. Christ is our example. John 17:1, Father, the hour has come, glorify thy Son, that thy Son may also glorify thee. That was His purpose. It's to glorify God. He said in John 4:34, my meat, that is my necessity, is to do the will of Him that sent me. That's my meat. That's what's absolutely necessary. People don't think that way. God's people don't think that way. Many people will ask the question of individuals, what do you do for a living? But you know, the more important question is, what do you live for? Regardless of what you do for a living, that's not what's most important. What do you live for? That's most important. And a lot of God's people, without any shame whatsoever, well, I live for my family. Well, shame on you, because that's not why you're here. God is the reason. God is the reason. God is the purpose. Most spend their lives, as we've already said, on diversions, caught up with and seeking and chasing success and comfort and pleasure and happiness. But God designed us to give glory to God. So what is necessary to fulfill this purpose? There are two things I want to mention. What is necessary? One, this is not one of the two. We have to realize that life has a definite purpose, and we've already seen that. The purpose of life is God, and to glorify God. And unless you realize that, you will waste your life. And life will be vanity and vexation of spirit. So what do we need? We need a knowledge of God. But it's not just a mere knowledge of God, but a knowledge that controls and dictates our life. I need to know God in a way that controls my life, dictates my life. I need to know God in a way that grips my heart. I need to know in this way that there is a sovereign God who rules over all, who is self-existing, who is all-knowing, who is all-wise, who is all-governing, all-defining, all-satisfying. He needs to be known, and He needs to be treasured as God. Treasured. We need to have confidence, absolute confidence in this God. An assurance, a conviction, and a certainty concerning His greatness, His vastness, His majesty, His glory, His power, His wisdom, His love, His mercy, His care. We hear these words from God in Psalm 46:10, know that I am God. If we're going to live for His glory, if we're going to realize this is my purpose, you have to know that He is God. A lot of people don't know that. A lot of God's people don't know that. Know that I am God in such a way that it absolutely grips our hearts, in such a way that it draws us to Him, causing us to embrace Him and love Him and revere Him and to look to Him and to praise Him, causing us to enjoy Him. Need to know Him. Need to know Him. Because the more we know Him, the more we're going to look to Him. And the tighter our embrace will be of Him. And the more we seek Him, And the more we'll come to Him, and the more we'll surrender to Him, and the more we'll cast everything upon Him, and the more we'll rest on Him, when we come to this realization, He is God, we'll do those things. The more that we know God, the greater our love for Him. People say, I just want to love God more, get to know Him more. You'll love Him more. The greater our desire to please Him and serve Him, the greater our desire to worship Him. We need to know God in a way that transforms our life. This is absolutely necessary for us to realize the purpose of life is to glorify God. Secondly, if we're going to live life as God designed it, get out of the way. This is perhaps the hardest thing. Get out of the way. One of these days I'm going to preach a series on that. Get out of the way. Just get out of the way. Psalm 115:1, we already made reference to this. But it says, not unto us, O Lord. And then he repeats it. Not unto us, but unto thy name give glory. When you and I wake up in the morning, it's not about us. It's about giving glory to God. Not unto us. Lord, get me out of the way. We ought to pray that all the time. We often pray for the Lord to remove things that are in the way. Well, you know what the number one thing in the way is? Ourselves. Lord, get me out of the way. Just get me out of the way. If we're going to glorify God, we've got to get out of the way. Jesus said that we must deny ourselves. We must oppose ourselves. Not too many people do that. We must refuse ourselves. We must turn down ourselves. Get out of the way. Get out of the way. It's ceasing to consider our own will. Well, I know what God says, but get out of the way. It's not about our will. It's not about our pleasure. It's not about our agenda. Get out of the way. We're to renounce the right that we think we have to rule our own lives. It's my life. I can do what I want. You need to renounce that. Get out of the way. Get out of the way. Get out of the way in order to be molded and shaped and trained and taught and transformed and conformed to His image. The most fulfilling life that you and I can live is for Him. It's for Him. Solomon says, I've tried it all. And here's the conclusion of the whole matter. It's all about God. I've tried everything. I've had it all. And my life was vain. It was empty. Because I was living apart from God. It's a sad thing. I've seen many people who I believe were saved. What a waste. What a wasted life. What a wasted life. I believe it was David Cassidy when his deathbed said, "What a waste." Yep. What a waste. You live for the wrong thing. You live your life for what it was not designed for. You'll waste it. You'll waste it. And you know what's sad about that? It's not just that one life is wasted. You've trained your children to do the same thing. And they probably will. It's just one wasted life after another. But our lives do not have to be wasted. They don't have to be vanity. They don't have to be empty. Life does not have to be one big agitation. Well, I can get agitated about a lot of things, and do. But if I keep my eyes on my purpose, I'm to glorify God. It's hard to be agitated. It's important that we remember these earthly lives are short. As you get older, you understand that more and more. You tell a young person life is short, they have no idea what you're talking about. None. They have no idea. As you get older and you start doing the math, if you got any sense at all, you realize life is short. It's only temporary. It's a temporary assignment. And our assignment is glorify God. That's our opportunity. Life is an opportunity. Life is opportunity. May we be fully persuaded with Solomon concerning the vanity of a life lived apart from God. And may we be fully persuaded with Solomon concerning the purpose of life is God. We need to be persuaded of those two things. I can live my life apart from God, and if I do, I'll waste it. Or I can live my life for God, and it'll be a useful life. Brother Ben, if you'll come and lead us in a verse of song.